the internet. Annie, if you'd like to take over. Hi, everyone.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. We have an outstanding program tonight. It's exploring the majestic beauty of Prince William Sound in Alaska. Our presenter is noted Alaskan author and explorer um, and educator Debbie Miller. Debbie will take us to the glacier-carved fjords and lush forest in Prince William Sound. She'll be sharing the images and stories from her award-winning book, A Wild Promise, Prince William Sound. It was published in 2019 by Braided River. And I'll post information in the chat about where you can purchase the book. Debbie's explored and written about Alaska's wilderness and wildlife for more than 4 decades. In addition to A Wild Promise, she's the author of other award-winning books about the Arctic, as well as numerous children's books about Alaska nature. Debbie's a co-founder of the Alaska Wilderness League. It's an organization that protects Alaska's public lands by fighting for the wilderness, wildlife, indigenous rights, and a cleaner energy future. On another note, Debbie's a political activist. She's working on the campaign of Dr. Al Gross, who's running against the Republican incumbent Dan Sullivan in the Alaska Senate race. Al is an orthopedic surgeon and an environmentalist, and Debbie thinks he has a pretty good shot at winning the race. So, Debbie, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for coming, and we can't wait to see the show.
All right. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's great. It's great to connect with everybody in Southern California. I just want to give you a look at what's out my window. I'm in Sitka, Alaska, which is on the wild island of Baranof Island, and we're looking out at Jamestown Bay, and which is connected to the Pacific Ocean. So we are connected through the water. There are only 9,000 people that live in Sitka, and we have 14 miles of road. So we're talking a small population and a very wild Tongass National Forest, which is right out the backyard. And in the front yard, I sometimes see humpback whales that are just spouting right offshore. So I feel very lucky to live here. And I'm happy to share with you the stories behind this book that came out a couple of years ago, A Wild Promise, Prince William Sound, a 5-year book project that took me to one of the most extraordinary places in Alaska, the Chugach National Forest. Some of you may have heard of it. It's our 3rd largest national forest in the United States. The largest is the Tongass National Forest, which is out in my backyard, 17 million acres, our largest national forest. But if we continue farther north up the coast, up near Anchorage, you get to the northern edge of our largest temperate rainforest in the world, the Chugach National Forest, which is about 5 million acres of beautiful forest lands and glaciers and mountains. And it's an interesting thought to think that this temperate rainforest that is right here around us also extends all the way down the coast of British Columbia into Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. So when you're in the redwoods, say in Santa Cruz or up, in Muir Woods, near where I grew up in the North Bay, north of San Francisco, you are really connected. That forest continues all the way up the coast till you get up near Anchorage to Prince William Sound. And so that will be the subject of tonight's book. I wanted to show you just a couple of things about how I do the writing process, and just so you get an idea. Of course, I take photographs. I worked with an amazing photographer to create the book, a person who had worked and lived in the area for 20 years. Hugh Rose is a naturalist guide, and he had a portfolio of pictures that were extraordinary to work from. And so we teamed up together, and so lots of pictures, of course, writing every day in my journal. And then sometimes I would take things with me like rocks to remember the texture of a place, or a story behind the place. Like this rock was actually lying on top of an iceberg, and it was floating down College Fjord, and it had come from the mountains, the Chugach Mountains that go up to 12, 13,000 feet. So this is a chunk of a mountain that a glacier actually brought a part of it down into the seawater on an iceberg floating down the fjord. And I just picked it off the iceberg because I wanted to remember that I had a piece of mountain that came from the high country by way of a glacier carrying it. So it's a very dynamic landscape where you have glaciers carving out mountains and valleys. And then maybe this rock was a little special rock because I found it next to my tent near the Columbia Glacier that has receded about 12, 13 miles. So if I had camped in the same place, like in 1980, this rock would have been under about 1,000 feet of ice of the Columbia Glacier. And over a 30-year period, all of this massive ice glacier, you'll see pictures later, that ice was, it's gone now, but it was lying on top of this rock. If I had been there in 1980, of course, I wouldn't have pitched my tent there. Or colors. This is a rock from Elrington Island on the edge of the Pacific, on the outer coast of Prince William Sound. And I loved it because of the color. It had this orange color that I learned from a geologist, that this is what happens when rocks lie at the bottom of an ocean. And then when they get uplifted, they have this iron oxidization that causes that orange color. So rocks help me tell stories, and they help me remember places. But the pictures really are worth 1,000 words. So I'm going to try now to pull up, and we'll have time for Q&A. So please, if you have questions, put them in the chat. And then at the end, I'll be happy to try to answer questions about this amazing area. But let's take you there. I want you to come with me to Alaska, and let's see if we can very seamlessly open this program. And I'm just loading it now onto my screen, and then I'm going to whoops. Oh dear, now, how do I share it? It's already on my screen. Okay, wait a minute. It's on the screen. Gotta share it. Okay, here we go. We'll screen share now. There we go. Haha, it worked. Oh my gosh, it worked. Oh yes, yay. There's that moment of panic. So am I doing okay, Rachel? Does the screen look all right?
It looks great.
Okay, so let's just go right to the place. You are looking at the Mears Glacier, beautiful, one of the many tidewater glaciers that stream down through the Chugach Mountains, which are some of the highest coastal mountains in the world. These Chugach Mountains that rise up from sea within 10 miles of the coast. You can be at sea level, and then all of a sudden you're on top of a 13 or 14,000 foot peak. So this gives you a feeling for what we call the Nellie Wan College Fjord Wilderness Study Area. So it's not wilderness. I mean, it is wilderness. If you look at this, there are no villages, there are no roads. It's totally wild, beautiful mountains, glaciers, alpine tundra you can see, and then you see the fringe of the forest that's near the glacier. And below the glacier, you see the tidewater. You see the fjord water right there, that's salt water, the mixing of fresh and salt water right there. So this is really what this wilderness study area is all about. It's a mixing of all these things, high country, seawater, rivers of ice, beautiful forest. And we're talking about an area that's about the size of Yellowstone National Park, 2.1 million acres. So it's a pretty good size of wilderness here. Again, imagine Yellowstone National Park. Maybe some of you have been there, 2 million acres, good sized piece of land, and there are no roads. The closest town is Whittier and Valdez, which you can get to this area by boat or by kayak or seaplane, but there are no roads. So it's a gem that's between those two communities. and a few little villages on the outskirts, but really no communities in this wilderness study area. Okay, let's see if we can go forward here. So over a 5-year period, I explored the area by sea kayak, by boat, on foot, hiking. And on this particular trip, we sea kayaked up the College Fjord, exquisite fjord. There are about a dozen of these fjords that were carved by glaciers over eons. And you're looking up at the Harvard Glacier, which is one of the larger ones. And the highest peak in the Chugach Mountains is right at, I don't know if my cursor shows up, but you can see that little pyramid shape, about 13,000 something feet, Mount Marcus Baker, which has glaciers flowing all the way down to this Harvard Glacier that you see here, the face. So this took us 2 weeks going up this fjord, camping in different coves and bays, and exquisite country. Another way that I saw much of the sound was on this boat, the Discovery. I traveled, it's a working yacht. They only hold 12 passengers and they have kayaks on top. So this small kind of a passenger boat for people, for tourists to come and to see this area, it's a great way to experience Prince William Sound, because his small boat can go into areas where, say, a large cruise ship, which is anybody going to take a cruise ship anymore now? With COVID, I think that's something that's going to be a thing of the past. But this was a great way to get to areas that few people can see unless you have a boat like this. So this is the Discovery, which helped. And this is the captain of that boat that has been going into these areas for about 25 years. And he knew tons of information about the different landscapes, the ecology, the history. So he was a big help on the project. This is the photographer who I worked with for 5 years, Hugh Rose. He also is a friend, and I've worked on other books with him, and he lives in Fairbanks, Alaska, where I've spent much of my life living in Fairbanks. So we've known each other for many years, and great photographer and naturalist. And after 5 years, this was the outcome of our book here about this extraordinary area. So through the course of the years, I traveled with groups of people that were visiting this area for the first time to see the magic and the look of wonder in their eyes when they would see their first tidewater glacier. It is a magical experience to see this kind of place, because there is drama all the time with the glaciers moving, calving, belching, and you'll be hearing sounds here in a second. Let's see if I can get there we go. Tim Lydon is the wilderness steward for the Chugach National Forest. He also was a huge help, and in taking an artist in residence position, he and his wife, Barbara Lydon, they together managed the 2 million acres of this proposed wilderness area. And they were great teachers and took me to many of the areas that I wouldn't have had a chance to see without the Forest Service help. And I traveled on a couple of trips with my partner, Richard Nelson. Some of you may know of his work. He's written many books, and he passed away last November. We were really sorry to lose him. He's a wonderful, wonderful man that gave a lot for the conservation movement, and very active anthropologist. So he recorded the sounds that you'll be hearing in this program with that parabolic that he has in his hand there. And in this case, he was recording the sounds that the glaciers make, their voices. So he works very hard at that. If you're interested in radio and listening to natural history programs, he has a wonderful show called Encounters, and it's on the encountersnorth.org website. And if you go to Encounters North, you can, there's a little link that'll say, listen now. And there are 100 different programs on the environments and animals of Alaska, and they're great. Each one is about a half an hour long. So you might really enjoy that. If you want to learn more about a specific animal or a place in Alaska, I would encourage you to, if you like those podcasts, you can just pull them up on your computer and listen in. So this gives you a feeling for that relief that you experience when you're in Prince William Sound. Here you are down on the water, you can see the Discovery boat, and beyond you get a sense of these glaciers that are incredible, these magnificent glaciers that fall down to the sea from these highest mountains that collect up to 40 to 50 feet of snow a year. From the big storms that come in the Gulf of Alaska, they just blanket these mountains, and that's how these glaciers form over thousands and thousands of years. Of course, they're now melting at the most rapid rate that we've ever seen. A glaciologist that I worked with, a fellow named Shad O'Neill, I will quote what he says. In Alaska, we have the fastest changing ice landscape in the world. So our glaciers are melting faster, and we're contributing to sea level rise more than any other region in the entire world. About as much as 20% of sea level rise is coming from the melting glaciers of Alaska and the sea ice. So it's definitely, climate change is evident and very pronounced in Alaska, and I'm reminded of it every day living here. So when you're going up the fjords, this gives you a sense of going through the icebergs, which is a magical experience, and the sounds are incredible. We'll get into the sounds in a second. This, if you are a map lover, just to give you a sense of the geography, Anchorage is off to the west here, to the left. Here's Anchorage. And then Valdez is off to the east here, Valdez. And in between, you've got the Neliwan College Fjord Wilderness Study Area and Prince William Sound and all these fjords that go to these incredible places where these glaciers pour into the sea. Right here, you might remember, some of you, the 1964 earthquake. The epicenter for that quake was near College Fjord, right here. And when that earthquake happened, there was a huge tsunami, which, and the quake itself was such an epic uplift that Montague Island here on the outer coast beyond the wilderness study area, this island raised up 40 feet during that quake. So this was a monster quake, and we were lucky that more people didn't perish from the tsunami. We lost, I think, over 125 people that died in Valdez, that died in the small village of Chiniga Bay that was wiped out, and they had to rebuild down here as a new village, Chiniga Bay, where the native indigenous people, the Chugach people, have lived for 4,000 years in this area, and one of their villages was wiped out. They had survivors, but it was a horrible, horrible, devastating tsunami for this little village in the original Chiniga Bay village. So that gives you a little feeling of geography. We can have questions later about that if you have any questions on geography. It's an incredible place. Okay, trying to go forward here. So College Fjord, back in 1899, John Muir came up this fjord on an expedition known as the Harriman Expedition. John Burroughs was on that boat. And when he saw this area, he thought it was the most exquisite landscape he had ever seen in terms of glaciers and the beauty of the alpine country. When John Muir was here writing about this place and sketching it, these glaciers all came well into the water. They were all true tidewater glaciers. And now you look at our time in 2020, and these glaciers have all receded, and many of them have become landlocked. Like this Vassar Glacier used to come down into the water, and now the edge of that glacier is, several hundred feet above the sea level here. hope you could all hear that amazing sound. And you can see that person. This is not me. This is someone else that was out kayaking and keeping a safe distance. This is sort of foreshortened with a long lens, but it gives you a sense of what it's like to be in front of a face of a tidewater glacier. This is anywhere from 20 to 30 stories high, 200 to 300 feet high, these tidewater glacier faces. Of course, that's only showing a small part of the glacier, maybe 20%. The other 80% is underwater. So we don't see that part that's being undercut by all the tidal action coming into these fjords. That warm water or warmer water eats away at the glacier, and that's why you have this calving where it sloughs off and you get the dramatic thundering sounds. The color of the ice is really exceptional. I've never been in a place except glacier country that has that color blue. And I wish I could describe why it's that color in terms of maybe some of you have a physics background, but from what I've been told, blue light is a shorter wavelength than red light or yellow light. And because of that, the red and the yellow rays more easily penetrate through the ice, and we are left with only seeing the blue that is refracted and that's reflecting back to us. And it kind of makes sense, but then it kind of doesn't. Like, where's the red and the yellow? You know, it's gone. Somehow we just see the blue, but it is so exceptional and such a beautiful color, as is this color, which you might call this glacial milk, because when the glaciers come into the sea, they bring with them a lot of ground up particles. As the glacier travels through the mountains, it grinds the bedrock, and all of that powder, this sort of whitish fine particles that come into the ocean, it creates this milky kind of color, and you can see these beautiful shades of Caribbean blue in certain light occasions. And this is an earthquake forest. This is a place where you see all these dead standing trees that are dead and standing, and they're skeletons because they were flooded during the '64 quake, when some areas rose up and were uplifted, other areas sank. And when the land sank down, the seawater penetrated the forest, and then the trees died from taking in all that salt water, and they got really pickled. And so they're still standing, and they provide great roosting spots for eagles and seagulls and other nesting birds, perching birds. This is my daughter, Robin Miller, who is a pediatric oncology nurse in Anchorage. And she's of the generation of, why take a kayak when you can just inflate a paddleboard? And so she comes down with me sometimes to Prince William Sound, or she goes on her own, and she loves paddleboarding in front of glaciers. And at first I was very concerned because you look kind of vulnerable standing on this surfboard, and the water might be 34, 35 degrees. But she said, Mom, I have a built-in life vest. You know, she wears a life vest, and then if she falls, she can just crawl back onto her paddleboard, where if you were in a kayak, maybe you'd even be in worse trouble if it was, you know, getting filled with water. So she feels pretty confident. And this is another way that you can see these fjords, is by kayak and by paddleboard. Well, that was Berge seltzer, which are trapped air bubbles that inside the ice, that as that ice melts, might be hundreds of years old, when those little bubbles burst, sounds like champagne bubbles, and it's called Berge seltzer, and it's a wonderful sound when it's really quiet. You can hear the ice melting in the fjords like that. Snap, crackle. So tons and tons of water stream down from the mountains, from all of this snow that's accumulated over the winter. And with that water, lots of nutrients. One thing that I had never thought of when I started the research on the book is that I'd always thought that glaciers were frozen rivers of ice that carved through our mountains, and that some of them that came into the sea. What I didn't realize was the importance of what the glacier does in grinding up bedrock and minerals and phosphates and iron and magnesium, and all the building blocks for life are brought into the ocean by the glaciers. And those building blocks are important for phytoplankton, zooplankton, small fish that live in the glacial waters like capelin and sandlands, these little oily fish that the birds like to eat, that the whales like to eat, the krill. You wouldn't have the productive nearshore waters without these minerals that come from the mountains, that the glaciers are largely responsible for bringing this really huge in tonnage, huge amount of material that comes down, that's ground by the force of the weight, 1,000 feet of ice carving through these mountains. When I first heard that sound, I thought it was a bird. And it turns out it was a harbor seal pup, cooing almost for its mother. So one of the wonderful things about glaciers is they also provide habitat. And here's an example. You have these glacial harbor seals that every year they will seek out glacial fjords to have their baby pups. Now imagine this, okay? You've got these seals that are all going up the fjords. They're crawling up on these slabs of ice. You know, why would they do that? Well, there are no predators in this area, or very few. If they're out in more open areas, they might have orcas, killer whales that might come and try to ambush or grab a pup, a newborn pup. So they like these quiet areas, these safe areas. It's a refuge for them. And the little pups, they're the same, they're a mammal. So their temperature, body temperature is like ours, maybe 98 degrees. Imagine if you're a little pup. When you slide out of your mother, you're landing on a slab of ice. Temperature might be 40 degrees, and you're a little 24-pound little harbor seal pup that goes from inside a warm-blooded mammal, bam, you're on the ice. And they, of course, are well adapted for that, but you kind of marvel at it, that this is a mammal. It's covered in fur, has a lot of blubber, perfectly well adapted to this zone. But it's something to see these little cute pups resting next to their mothers on the ice. And they just have that look on their face, those liquid eyes. They kind of have almost like your pet dog or your pet lab, right? This is a pup here, and I was pretty close with my kayak, and I took this picture, and it almost really looked like it was giving me a little wave. Doesn't it look like it's just raising its little flipper? It was so cute. It was so unafraid, and I got to get a pretty close look. And this one gives you a good look at its long whiskers, which they actually use like antenna. And so when they're swimming in the turbid water near these glaciers, they find fish because they feel the vibrations in the water from the fish swimming by through their whiskers. And they can detect the size of the fish and the speed of the fish all through these whiskers. It's amazing. And so they're just equipped for this environment, and they love the glacial fjords for the richness of the fish that are in these waters and the habitat for the calving for the pups. Of course, sometimes you see the sea otters, my favorite. They are the most adorable animal almost in the world. I mean, there are other ones too, but when you see a sea otter with its newborn pup lying on its belly, and you just watch them, and they're just so cute. And they're our smallest marine mammal. And unlike the harbor seals, they have no blubber. So they rely completely on their fur for warmth, and they live in the ocean. 95% of their life, they're floating around, and that fur protects them from the cold. One scientist counted 1 million hairs per square inch on the fur coat of a sea otter, which is why the Russians discovered very quickly back in 1741 that this animal would be great to hunt, almost to extinction, and sell those furs all over the world. So back in the late 1700s, they started harvesting these animals. There were about 200,000 sea otters back in the 1800s. By 1900, only 1% of the population was left in the whole world. Only 2,000 sea otters were alive. And then we passed the Marine Mammal Act, International First Seal Treaty, and we had these laws to protect these animals. We just barely saved them before they went extinct. And now they're doing pretty well. They've come back. Some populations are still endangered in certain areas, but for the most part, they've recovered. Another marine mammal that we have in Prince William Sound is the Steller sea lion, which is about over 2 times as big as a California sea lion. So maybe some of you have seen California sea lions, which they look very similar, but these guys are like, the males get up to 2,500 pounds. They're huge. And so this is an endangered population. Their numbers have been going down since the 1960s. Scientists are looking into the reason why. Some of it might be related to climate change and warmer ocean temperatures, so that the type of oily fish that they like to eat are now going deeper in the water because the surface temperatures are warmer. And so because of that, they can't get their favorite prey. That's something that they're looking at. The other thing is they are in competition with big trawlers. There are a lot of these big trawling vessels that fish for pollock. And sometimes they have a little bit of conflict there, because these trawling ships can take huge amount of fish in these vessels. So that's another issue. So this particular animal was really important to the indigenous people that lived in this area going back 3,000-4,000 years, where they would not only eat the animal, they would use the hides for the coverings of their kayaks. They would use the fat for heat and for light by burning the fat in like a seal oil lamp, clothing, boots. And there are some people, native people in Alaska, that still hunt the Steller sea lion, but under really strict regulatory measures, because they are endangered. So I'm not even sure if this population has a hunting season, but perhaps there are 2 populations, one that is not endangered. So they might hunt those, which is allowable and makes sense for the native people that have lived off the land for thousands of years. You want to protect their subsistence resources. So in Prince William Sound, we have lots of seabirds, and a lot of these birds like to nest in colonies. Like this is the black-legged kittiwake. And sometimes when you're kayaking by or boating by, there they are. So they're a diving gull, and they like to nest on cliffs, on little ledges. They lay 1 egg, and you just wonder how they do it, because if that egg just gets a little tipsy, maybe a big strong wind, there are no guardrails. But they've been doing this for a long time, and they're good at it. And then we have the puffins. Now, who doesn't love a puffin? These are tufted puffins, and they're a member of the alcid family, or auks. They're a seabird, webbed feet, and they like to nest in colonies. These guys burrow into the ground. They build tunnels and lay their egg back in the end of a tunnel. And their huge beaks are great for catching fish. I think once I counted something like 10 or 12 fish in one catch that a puffin had in its beak. So they're one of the many seabirds that we have. We have rhinoceros auklets and murrelets and murres and pigeon guillemots, quite a number of different seabirds that live in Prince William Sound. I think there's something like 40 million seabirds that nest in Alaska along the coastal areas during the summer. A phenomenal amount in groups like this. You see them? And my favorite, they're not showy. They're not like a puffin, the marbled murrelet. And some of you may have heard the story about this incredible bird that is a seabird, has webbed feet, flies like a bumblebee, very, very fast, short wings. And they, unlike most seabirds, most colony nesters, these birds, for whatever reason, decided that they wanted to be isolated when they nest. So they picked old growth forest as their nesting habitat, and they lay one egg in a tree, an old spruce or hemlock tree, and they may be 100 feet or more above the forest floor, and then they might even be 10, 20 miles from the ocean, and they fly back and forth every day to feed their little chick that stays in that nest for maybe 2 or 3 weeks before it takes off. And its first flight is all the way through the forest to the sea. So here's a very unique bird that we've learned about over the years, that is the only bird that does this, that's a seabird that chose the forest to have a place to begin their life. And the Kitlitz's murrelet, which is a cousin, is a glacial murrelet that you always see right where the glaciers are coming into the ocean. And that's because they are adapted to that turbid water. They have extra big eyes so they can see the fish underwater. And instead of nesting in a tree, they fly up the glaciers and they find a ledge or a big giant rock in the talus, and they'll lay their egg on a rock pile. And they'll have one chick, just like the marbled murrelet, and they'll go back and forth from the ocean high up onto the talus slopes to feed their one little chick. And she turns into this big, oily, round, fat, furry looking chick because she's getting a lot of good food here. This is a very healthy looking chick. Very hard to spot. These are very isolated nests. Even scientists have a tough time finding a Kitlitz's murrelet nest. Well, the humpback whale, what a magnificent animal to see breach out of the water. Our numbers have been going down with the humpback whales in recent years, and scientists are trying to figure out why. The calving rate has been lower. People are seeing fewer whales. It may have something to do with the ocean temperatures and climate change. We don't really know. That's something that they're looking at now. But there has been a change in population, and we're seeing fewer of them, but they're a glorious animal. And again, they love to feed on krill and herring, and these nearshore waters near the glaciers are really rich with food for them when they are there. Of course, they spend the winter, a lot of them, in Hawaii, but some of them are here much of the year, not less time in Hawaii and actually more time in Alaska waters. The Dall's porpoise, another marine mammal that we see that it looks like a small orca or killer whale. It's one of the fastest swimming marine mammals in the world. This is one of my favorite pictures because you can almost, if you look carefully, you can see the temperate rainforest in the wake. In the reflection of the water is the forest, which is how I like to think of Prince William Sound and the wilderness study area, which is the largest wilderness study area we have in the country, proposed for wilderness, but not truly protected. And that's something we're working on. We'd like to see it a formal wilderness so that it would be protected forever. But you can see it in this water, and the forest and the water, I like to think of it as a mosaic, that it's all one web of life: forest, water, glaciers, everything connected. The Columbia Glacier is one of the fastest retreating glaciers in the world. And I mentioned it when I showed you the rock that was next to my tent. Well, here's the picture taken in 1983 that shows the Columbia Glacier. This is about a 3-mile wide fjord here. And you're looking at about a 10-mile course of ice. The ice is about 1,200 feet thick. This is 1983. And then if we fast speed forward to 2015, 2016, that ice is gone. All of it melted. And so my tent was right near the edge of where the ice was in 1984, where I found that rock near this island here, a little bit beyond the island. And the terminus of the glacier used to be right here. Now it's behind this mountain way up here. So it's gone back 15 miles into the mountain, and all that over 1,000 feet of ice that was in this area has now contributed to global sea level rise. It's a lot of water. Another shot showing you how things have changed. When John Muir was on his steamship exploring this area in 1899, they would not have been able to go up this fjord. This would have been all ice going up to this point. From here all the way up along here would have been all covered in ice. And this island would have been buried in ice. Only 50 years ago, this island did not exist. No one had ever stepped foot on it. And then today we walked on this, not today, but in the last few years, I've walked on the island. And when you're walking on this bedrock, you can see these little etchings, these striations that the glacier made with rocks that were on the belly of the glacier that ground into the bedrock and made these trails. And as you're walking on it, you can almost smell the glacier. You almost get a sense that the glacier was just there yesterday. There's a smell in the air that smells like ice and rock. So this is kind of, again, gives you just a sense of you're down near sea level, and yet you've got these amazing mountains right beyond you. Really spectacular landscape. And sometimes the glaciers, even though they're all losing mass, all the glaciers in Alaska are receding, they're losing mass because of climate change. And occasionally you'll get a glacier that fast speeds, rushes forward and knocks down a forest. It's still a smaller glacier because it's losing mass, but because of warmer temperatures, the glacier is lubricated on the belly and it moves quickly forward, and you get a sense, oh, the glacier is advancing, but it's really a temporary thing. It really will eventually recede. But this is an example of where a glacier ran forward because of the topography, knocked down some trees, and lots of force in that, right, that picture. This is one that is receded. It used to be down near the water's edge, and now it is a landlocked glacier. So there are 21 of these tidewater glaciers. It's the largest concentration of tidewater glaciers in North America, where you are right now. And this is one that was a tidewater glacier, but is no longer. Mountain goats are something that you see not a lot of. There's a small population that lives in this area. You're kind of at the northernmost range of the mountain goats in Alaska, in Prince William Sound, but it's always great to see these sure-footed, beautiful animals. So this is another fjord, the Harriman Fjord in Barry Arm. And this is a place where you have 3 glaciers that come into the fjord. And if you were back at the turn of the century, back in 1899, you would not see this water. All of these 3 glaciers would have merged together, and there would have been one terminus glacier that would have blocked off this fjord right in here. So that was very different when John Muir came. He actually sketched a picture of it. He was in the boat looking at that fjord And he made a little sketch showing that the one glacier coming out that was blocking off this other fjord. And that's quite an adventure when they tried to explore this. They were able to get through, but it was really a harrowing kind of experience. In the book I wrote about it. So when you hear the chittering of a bald eagle, and there are lots of bald eagles in Alaska, when you see a bald eagle, you can be pretty sure in Prince William Sound that you're near a salmon stream. They're just a spectacular bird to look at in their eyes, their beak. And then when you're along these salmon streams, in Prince William Sound, we've got about 2,000 streams where 4 different species of salmon spawn. So it's an incredibly important area with pristine waters for the salmon and for the animals that like to eat them, like black bears. And there are a few brown bears on one island. We have mostly black bears. This one, a little unusual, decided to climb a waterfall. Love this picture that Hugh took. Here's a bird that you might see in Southern California because they live in your area year-round. This is the orange crown warbler. Some of them also live in Alaska and they spend the winter in Mexico, but there are some that choose not to migrate, that live maybe in your backyard. Or the Steller's jay is another one that lives on the coast of Alaska, but also lives down in Northern California, Washington, and Oregon. And this was the bird that when Vitus Bering was exploring, the Russian explorer, back in 1741, I think it was, they were trying to find North America. They were in the fog, and the fog lifted, and they saw this island, which is now known as Kayak Island. When they reached the island, they got off the boat, and the naturalist on board, a guy named Steller, as in Steller sea lion, he was a German naturalist, and the first thing that he heard and saw was a Steller's jay. And once they saw that bird and heard it, they knew they were on a new continent because they don't have Steller jays in Asia or over in Europe. So the bird was like the signal that they'd made it. Beautiful, beautiful recording that Nell's made of a common loon, which in the winter, they live all up and down our wonderful Pacific coast. So you might have them right near your home as well. And we see them breeding across Alaska at different lakes, and then they come down to the coast for the winter. River otters, they're all across the sound. They bring tons of marine nutrients into the forest, which acts as a great form of fertilizer. And so they live in water systems, freshwater systems, and they love the intertidal to get mussels and different food sources along the shore that they bring into the forest. And this gives you a sense of the land. When you're walking, you have a lot of peat bogs and sort of these open meadows that are squishy to walk on, but not like tussocks when you're in the Arctic and you have to stumble over the tussocks. It's more like a very soft, forgiving, squishy meadow environment. Poorly drained soils, but beautiful meadows and forests and wildflowers. So here's a bird that lives year-round in Alaska, but it also sometimes decides that it wants to winter in Southern California. So I don't know if you would hear a singing one in your area, but you gotta love their voice. This is a little wren, very tiny bird with a big, gorgeous voice. So we love. It's one of the birds that wakes me up every morning here in Sitka. Love that little guy. And the rufous hummingbird, another incredible migrant, amazing bird, brilliant little animal. It only weighs as much as a penny. And a friend of mine who's a biologist, Kate McLaughlin, who I interviewed for the book, she banded 500 rufous hummingbirds in Prince William Sound. One of them went to Tallahassee, Florida, the longest documented hummingbird migration in the world. And which is just, you just think it's not possible. How could something that weighs a penny fly from northern Alaska all the way to Florida, crossing all those miles, and a lot of nectar, a lot of flower nectar and insects. Amazing little bird. The intertidal has its beauty. Starfish, oyster catchers, which you also have in Southern California, beautiful oyster catchers. This man, David Sowinski, he's the northernmost oyster farmer, and he has raised oysters in Prince William Sound for 20 or 30 years, has permission to do that under the Alaska Natural Interest Lands Conservation Act. And so you're allowed to do this under permit. And there are a couple of fish hatcheries in Prince William Sound, and that is it. That's all the really human activity that you have there. And he's very conscious about doing things in a really environmentally safe way, the way he raises these oysters and sells them at the state fair, thousands of them. These are surf birds, which are on a pit stop here in Prince William Sound. They're migrating south, maybe coming down to Southern California. They're all up and down the coast. They like to nest in the mountains and the alpine tundra. And then they spend the rest of the year, when they're not raising their chicks, they're along the intertidal zone, the surf line. So that's why they call them surf birds. They're pretty cool. Harlequin ducks, varied thrush, beautiful singing bird that we hear there. Do some of you recognize that bird? This is one you might hear in California, the hermit thrush. We have them on every island in Prince William Sound. You will hear a hermit thrush. They love to nest in this environment and sing. So one of our favorites is the hermit thrush. This is Knight Island, the largest island in Prince William Sound. And this was heavily hit by the Exxon Valdez oil spill when they were cleaning up the beaches. This was just a monumental job tragedy, 1989. All of us living in Alaska at the time, this was the most tragic moment in Alaska's history, when we had 11 million gallons of oil that spilled into the Sound, onto these beaches that lingered for years. We lost thousands and thousands of birds that died. Lots of animals perished. My daughter was 2 at the time, and she would break down, sometimes crying at the dinner table, when she would see pictures on television of oiled birds or sea otters that people were trying to clean the oil off the fur. This is a toxic, lethal, horrible source of energy. And we're all guilty of using it. I fly in an airplane. I drive a car. We all should be driving electric cars. You know, we all should be making that transition, and we will get there sooner or later. So we're all responsible in a way because we use this product. But every time I'm using oil, always in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh, I can't wait till the day where I can just say I didn't use any oil today. None of the products that I used were made out of oil. We will get there, because this is something we're meant to get there. Our civilization knows it's the right thing to do. We shouldn't be using a toxic source of energy that can kill animals and that can kill people and that is toxic. So we all use it. We're going to get there. I'm excited about the new solar and wind and geothermal and all the alternatives that we're developing. I think we have a great future. I like to think positive about it. And the animals in Prince William Sound have been coming back to pre-spill levels over time. It's taken about 25, 30 years, but most of the pre-spill numbers are looking much better. The sea otters, about 4,000 of them died in the spill. And just in the last 5 years, they have come back to their pre-spill numbers now. There are about 4,000 sea otters that are living in Prince William Sound now. Orcas are a sadder story. There's one pod that will become extinct, which I think is the saddest story from the oil spill. A friend of mine, Eva Salitis, wrote a book about it called Into the Great Silence, a great book about orcas if you want to learn about killer whales. And she studied a pod for over 25 years that had 22 members in it at the time of the spill. Now there are only 7 left, and none of them will be able to reproduce. The reproducing animals in this pod died in the spill. And they have their own language. They're a distinct genetic group. So when the last of them die, that's the end of that genetic group, which they've learned through all of this research, that that these pods have their own language that no other pod speaks. So they stay together in these family units. That's the one reminder to me that, this is something that we need to get past. The good news is that they are building double-hulled tankers now. It's required to prevent the kind of spill we had in 1989. So we have made some strides to make the transportation of oil is safer now than it was in 1989. So we can be, glad for that. It's just, we need to go farther with renewable energy. So I'm going to close with this. To me, that is one of the most beautiful humpback whale songs recordings that I've ever heard. And that was actually recorded by another friend of mine, Jan Straley, who's a marine biologist who has studied humpback whales for 2 or 3 decades. And so she shared that one with me. And I just think I can almost put it to music. It's so beautiful. So how about some questions? Do we have some chats? Let's go.
Yeah. We have, Debbie, we have a couple questions, and I'll just start.
Okay.
The first one is from Ann Owens, and she says, I recently did some research on polar bears and found since the 1970s, when hunting became illegal, their numbers had risen. However, now since global warming, those in the Barents Sea area are struggling. But it seems that those in other areas of the Arctic are doing okay. So I know this will change as the climate continues to warm. But is this true so far? Do you think polar bears will be able to adapt?
It's a very good question. The lead scientist on polar bear research for the Beaufort sea bears, the ones that she's talking about that are considered endangered, threatened, endangered. This is Steve Amstrup, and I really respect him. There's always hope that they might adapt over time and maybe develop a land diet or interbreed with grizzly bears, because this has happened. There have been some hybrids. I like to be hopeful in that way. But according to Steve, he seems to think that they're pretty dependent on ice seals, on bearded seals, on ringed seals for their main source of food. Their whole way of life is adapted, revolves around the seals for their main source of food. And that involves hunting on ice, resting on ice, stalking seals through breathing holes that are in ice, denning on ice. Their home is ice. So if they lose their home, the foundation of their home, if it melts and disappears, yes, maybe some will be trying to live on land, but Steve is pretty worried that over time we'll lose them. You know, and specific populations are more at risk than others, like the Beaufort sea bears. You've got some areas that are melting at a faster rate, where there's just you know, longer distances that they have to swim, where the cubs aren't conditioned to swim for hundreds and hundreds of miles. They might be able to swim, you know, a short distance, but these animals get exhausted trying to find ice. So he's pretty strong about the only way we're going to save polar bears is by reducing our CO2. He's very scientific about it. You know, we cannot get over a certain level of our CO2 and our you know, parts per million and all. Once we get over whatever, the numbers kind of change, but 400 or 400 and something parts per million, it's just, you know, we're going to lose that ice. We're already losing it. It's just going to be, we're going to lose it faster, and they're going to have even a quicker time trying to adapt, which they may or may not be able to do. So it's a big question. It's a big concern. The ice is their home. So I don't know if that answers your question. I would strongly urge you, if you want to learn more, to go to the Polar Bears International website. And that's where Steve Amstrip works and is affiliated. And I think there are all kinds of interesting papers and articles about current research that's going on and what they're learning.
Thank you, Debbie. And another question is how, the Senate race and the different candidates, Al Gross and Dan Sullivan, how does that affect the local environment depending on which one were to win?
Well, I'm very excited about Dr. Al Gross. He's running as an independent. He's endorsed by the Democratic Party. He's very well liked. He's born and raised in Alaska. His father was Attorney General for the state of Alaska under our former Governor Jay Hammond, who was very well loved. Al Gross is an orthopedic surgeon, but prior to being a doctor, he was a commercial fisherman, and he loves salmon and respects the environment and wants to protect the waters for the salmon, which is a huge industry for Alaska. And who was it? Rachel, you were just eating your salmon tonight, came from the waters of Sitka. So if we continue to have industrial large-scale logging, that really affects the salmon streams where they spawn. If you clear cut the trees, the fish are very dependent on having shaded waters, protected waters, no sediment in the waters in order to rear their young, their eggs, to have the eggs hatch and be viable. So Al Gross, I asked him in a meeting not so long ago, I said, well, how do you feel about logging? And he said, well, he goes, I'm completely against industrial large-scale logging of old growth trees. We should be doing selective harvesting, secondary growth, value-added product, not be sending logs to Asia to be turned into pulp. And so he was really out front about that. I really respected him. He didn't beat around the bush. He wants to protect our forests of the Tongass. He is against Pebble Mine, which is one of the largest proposed mines in the world that has been proposed to be put in the headwater streams in Bristol Bay, where we have the largest sockeye red salmon run in the world. So he's come out against that. And some politicians are very sort of they don't really know, or they're wishy-washy on it. And he's very opposed and strong from the standpoint of protecting fisheries. And he believes in climate change, and he wants to do something about it. And healthcare. He's very, very strong on healthcare and helping us get a better healthcare system. And he's a doctor. So somebody brought out the point that only 3% of Congress, I think 3% of congressional members of the House and the Senate are physicians. So given that we're in a pandemic, wouldn't it be a great idea to have another physician in the Senate? And he has got a degree in public administration as well, or public health administration. So he wants to do more than just be a physician. He wants to change policy. So this is good. I'm excited about him. And right now it shows that they're tied. the other opponent, the Republican, Dan Sullivan, he's not a born and raised Alaska. He's a transplant from Ohio. And he is voted with Trump for every issue. I think like 97% of the time, he just votes whatever Trump wants. So I don't get a sense that he's an independent thinker like Dr. Gross, where Dr. Gross is independent and he's willing to caucus with either side. And I think that's what we need in Congress, is we need people working together. And I think he'll be really good at that. So I'm all for it. I'm helping with the campaign in a small way. So.
Thanks, Debbie. Last question. What can we in Southern California do to help protect the Alaska wilderness?
Oh my gosh. Well, I have to say, you know, especially with Rachel's here and her mom and Leah, you know, the Alaska Wilderness League, this is all we do. We work to protect Alaska, public lands, wild places. That's our focus. We don't work on California issues, unfortunately, or issues, you know, in Florida. We just focus on Alaska because we feel it's such a big state with so many special places that if you don't have an organization that's a watchdog and that's working on protecting our most beautiful, unique places, if we don't have somebody doing that work, acre by acre, we're going to lose them. So if you want to learn more, I would really encourage people to go to the Alaska Wilderness League website, which is alaskawild.org. Alaska Wild is easy to remember, .org. And you can see all the different campaigns we're working on. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is a huge issue we're working on right now. And of course, it would always be wonderful if you contacted your senator or your congressman to say, Alaska is important. Please protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. We have legislation now that would reverse the tax bill rider that opened the Arctic Refuge to oil drilling. They're planning a lease sale right now. It's not been made public when they're going to have it. It's going to be fought in the judicial system. We're going to fight it in court. But at the same time, we're working on the legislative end, where we've got proposed legislation that would reverse that horrible rider that opened it up to drilling. So if we get a new administration, that would be the first order of business, would be to get that area, restore protections for the Arctic Refuge. The Tongass National Forest, we're trying to protect the area here as well from, there's a roadless rule that has been in place for a long time that has protected the virgin old growth forest from new roads being built that are subsidized by taxpayers. And there's now a movement to get rid of that, to make Alaska exempt from the roadless rule, which would allow the Forest Service to get subsidies, build new roads, and access these virgin stands that are a very small part of this forest that are left now, that are still considered 500 to 800-year-old trees that they're like muir woods. You don't cut them down. So we work on, those are some of the things we're working on right now. And we would love to invite anybody listening tonight to learn more at the Alaska Wilderness League website or through Leah and other people working on staff there. We have a great executive director, Adam Colton, and we work really hard. Staff is amazing, like Leah, amazing staff. They're young and full of energy and but yeah, just talking it up, you know, just letting people know you care about Alaska, learning about it, reading about it, and doing all we can, you know, writing letters to the editor, commentaries, writing your congressman, your senator, just that you care. You want to see it protected. You cherish it. It's the wildest place we have in the United States. There's no other place like it. I mean, you know, you look at these pictures, you look at these whales, you look at those mountains, and there are no roads. There's no pollution. It's, you know, this is a gift that we give to ourselves and our grandchildren. So.
Thank you so much, Debbie. That was just a beautiful presentation. And it was really, I got the feeling I was right there because you were right there and we could hear exactly what your perceptions, your experience, and that made it so unique. So thank you so much for giving your time and coming and sharing all this, the majesticness of this area with us. Thank you, Debbie.
You're welcome. I don't know if you can still see the screen. I have a little thank you thing here of everybody that helped me, who I already mentioned. But then I've got, it's the publisher, Braided River. And then, oh yeah, so I was going to say, here's the alaskawild.org is the website for the Alaska Wilderness League, which you can learn more going to that website. And they've got so much going on and events. We've got these Zoom events we're doing. The Geography of Hope series is going on. And if you go, you can learn about, you know, the next one coming up, which is similar like what we're doing tonight. There'll be all kinds of speakers that are giving programs to learn more. And then the book, if you're interested in the book, we wanted to mention too that Braided River, the publisher, Mountaineers Books, they're giving 25% off for anybody that wants to order any of the Alaska books. So
I put that in the chat room so
yeah.
that, yeah, the information is there.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a nice thing to do, you know, because it's,
yeah.
Was there anything else?
Okay.
Well, thank you for listening. I'm really glad to share the Alaska program with you and
lucky for us. Lucky for us.
Debbie,
thank you.
I want to say a special thank you. I so appreciate this.
Oh, well, thank you for setting it up. You know, I really appreciate it, Louise, and just your whole family now, you know, getting to know, well, now Rachel and Lee.